The Nameless Prince, an urban fairy tale. The Nameless Prince will take you through the rabbit hole to a magical realm unlike anything you've seen before. Follow 10-year-old Seth Bauman from the sewers and abandoned metro tunnels of Los Angeles to the interior, a fantastical inner realm on the edge of defeat. Only Seth can save Interior from peril by becoming the Nameless Prince of Prophecy, embarking on an odyssey of riddles and self-discovery, and ultimately learning his own name, and thus his very purpose. Discover the greatness that lies within. Discover the Nameless Prince.
There was no one single inspiration for the Nameless Prince. It really was the culmination of a lot of concepts that had been germinating for a while in my head. And, specifically, I think I had always wanted to write a through the rabbit hole concept. I've talked about the hero's journey, but specifically through the rabbit hole, meaning the protagonist visits a magical realm or an alternate realm, usually through a portal, and a mythical creature appears to him or her. And, to me that's always symbolic of meeting the higher self or having a spiritual epiphany away from the stimulus of everyday life, basically. So I had always wanted to write a story sort of honoring that template. And then a couple things happened in a very condensed span of time that really inspired it to all just come together at the right end. Everything just kind of clicked at the right time, and synchronicity played its part, and the creative process worked, and it all just felt right. I was along the LA Wash. I just happened to look down among the little islands down there, and like Seth, just decided to abandon all reason and abandon all the pressing things I had to do that day, and just walk down there among the islands. And I saw basically what Seth saw, and not much more fantastical than I describe it in the book. A series of islands, like a homeless colony, and then ultimately a ramshackle tin hut with smokestacks and a water wheel churning, powering the colony. So I carried that image around for a while, and then literally 2 years later I did the same thing. I went down into the wash and took a little walk, and it was gone. So, I just love the idea of a magical realm that can appear or disappear at will. And then I was just beginning to germinate on the concept, or actually formulate the concept and outline it, and two more things happened. I had been asked to do a music video for a friend of mine who's a singer-songwriter, and she gave me her lyrics, and I was germinating on them and really trying to come up with a concept for the music video, and as often happens, woke up with the solution. I dreamt a very linear narrative to the lyrics of the song. So I was so inspired, I thumbnailed it and I wrote out a really great pitch for her, and it didn't fly. Her and the producer felt that they weren't, right on the mark. But I was so inspired by them, I kind of tucked them in my back pocket, and thank God, they became the cornerstone images of the Nameless Prince, and I won't say too much, but it has to do with the sleeping goddess. So a bit later, another thing happened that really directly affected or inspired the concept, and that is Michael Jackson died. I had no particular connection to Michael. I grew up, of course, with the Jackson 5, and I remember when his solo career took off, and definitely admired him, but I really had never bought an album. I was not connected really in any way, but when he died, I just was touched by how many people the world over were literally shedding a tear for this man. And I've had that reaction before when Princess Diana died. Didn't know her from Eve or Adam, but felt that I had a connection to her in that I think she enforced major social change on the planet and spiritual evolution, and I think now and then somebody comes along who has that kind of impact. Especially in this story, I very much nodded to a lot of traditions. Of course, there's just mythology, Greek and Roman mythology, and arguably the mythology that informs all religions the world over. I try to honor those archetypes, and I feel like that's where the resonance lies, actually, is in that I get to do that. Specifically in the young adult genre or in writing for children, yes, have huge influences. I grew up on Dr. Seuss, of course. I mean, let's start at the beginning. Dr. Seuss, I would say, definitely captured my imagination as a child, specifically Horton Hears a Who. Rocked my world as a kid, and I just related to it in a way that I didn't have words for at the time. I now know it's because artists often do see things that aren't there. So Horton, who sees or believes in this little entire world on a speck of dust on a tiny clover, was living basically what I would later realize was my reality. I'm not going to remember the writer's name, but there was a book called Jerome that really rocked my world as a kid. It was a very psychedelic 70s sort of illustrated book with a pretty profound concept. So, I think the things that I did respond to as a kid still resonate for me today, and there's a reason for that. I like to challenge children and not dumb things down for them. So thank God there was literature like that taught me how to live in the world. Very simply just a frog that was turned into a prince, but he still felt and looked like a frog and had to prove to himself and the villagers that greatness was within despite his appearance. Of course, Shel Silverstein and his simplicity and minimalism always spoke to me, and I cite him as an influence. Roald Dahl, of course. Then Narnia, I got a little older and I got into hardcore fantasy in the form of J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. So, of course, there's little nods to those traditions and genres. And then more recently, more contemporary, Neil Gaiman, I'm in awe of. I love the darkness and embracing the duality. I grew up, of course, on classic literature, so F. Scott Fitzgerald and Steinbeck and Emily Bronte and Dickens, and I just really love the rich tradition of classic literature. So I think I have that as a basis, and then it was sort of tempered over the years with a little more economy, and I credit Ray Bradbury for that. Now, he's not the most contemporary guy, but in the 70s, when I was growing up, it really was sort of mainstream reading, and I really love his economy, just saying a lot in very few words. Of course. I mean, I think, it's been said that if you sort of analyze the writings of an author, every character can be seen as a different aspect of his or her psyche. And especially within the structure of one piece, I think, for me, I'm always ostensibly writing about one topic. Theoretically, objectively, I know what my themes are, and I know what my parable is, and I know what I'm trying to portray. Only later do I see the cathartic function and what I was actually working out in the moment. So for me, I just love that about the creative process, that if you're open to happy accidents and you're open to synchronicity, you will ultimately grow or evolve as a result of having gone through the creative process. I thought that I was just sort of making a statement about who our true prophets might really be in this life. The visionaries, the creatives, not just painters and writers, but also mathematicians and inventors. So I was kind of making a statement about maybe those who, as Ayn Rand would say, bring the metaphysical to the surface for the masses to partake in, bringing the concepts into the perceptual realm. So I was just kind of honoring artists, musicians, creatives, and but I realized later all those characters were different voices inside of my head as an artist that were struggling to be heard. And the prophets really subconsciously became kind of warring factions inside of me, and my sense of futility and my purposelessness in the moment. And I taught myself through the writing of it, and only later did I realize the message of it, which is, we're all having an impact, whether we feel futile or purposeful. And we most often have that impact when the circuit is completed and we've given something. I personally think there should be an extra step in the creative process that's not acknowledged in the 7 accepted models of creativity, and that is what happens when you're done, quote unquote, when you've finished executing your project. Is the circuit completed? Does it land with people? Does it communicate? Does it change the world? Does it collect dust under the bed? So back to the question of whether or not I relate to Seth, of course. I thought of Bridge to Terabithia because, again, it had such a huge impact on me as a child. Again, it was probably the first book I had read in which I related 100% to the main character as an artist who's somewhat disenfranchised and feels a little bit different. But a lot of the anecdotes in The Nameless Prince were absolutely autobiographical. I had a friend, Eleni, not Elena, but Eleni, who was a Greek immigrant, and it was my job to walk her home from elementary, even though it was only a block. And we got caught scribbling out Nikki plus Eleni on the stucco wall of our elementary school. And I had to paint the wall. So that anecdote is 100% autobiographical. The bully in my elementary, whom my Facebook friends will all know, and in fact he is a Facebook friend. Won't mention any names, but the episode of the lefty scissors and Seth cutting him with the lefty scissors and having his painting privileges revoked, 100% autobiographical.